N10 podcast presented by Cisco. 10 minutes of the most up-to-date 49ers news first thing in the morning. I'm Lindsay Polaris, and joining me today is Jennifer Lee Chan of NBC Sports Bay Area. Jennifer, thank you for joining me this morning because we got a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. Week 1 is in the books. 49ers got a win. A lot of different moving pieces to help them get there, but it ended up being a good night for everybody.
Exactly. So let's do a quick game recap because, like you mentioned, it's a short week with a Minnesota road trip awaiting the 49ers at the end of the week. So the transition to game week is happening not a day earlier, but with one day less in the week to work with. So, how would you evaluate Brock Purdy's performance in the season opener, especially with Brandon Ayuk, Trent Williams completing their first full week back on that Monday night game?
I mean, I think there's a lot of growth for them to get better. I mean, I think they did a good job considering they only had about 4 practices together. I know Brandon Ayuk and Brock Purdy had a few extra credit throwing sessions, but really only a few practices for them to get up to speed. And you could tell that there were a little bit of rust there for Brandon Ayuk. But I think, as they get more practices together, they're only going to get better as the season progresses.
We'll look now to someone who had a career night, and that is running back Jordan Mason. First career start, 147 rushing yards. This is what we've seen in practice, but for him to translate it on the field, over 28 carries, how would you evaluate his performance?
I mean, just so happy for Jordan Mason because he's worked so hard. I mean, he told us how he got a jugs machine during the offseason, worked really hard with his dad to emulate Christian McCaffrey. And I think, having a guy like Christian McCaffrey in the room has been so good for Jordan Mason. I know he kind of butted heads with Bobby Turner when he first got to the 49ers, not exactly wanting to do I don't know if it's necessarily not wanting to do all the work or just not thinking that he needed to do the work that necessary to be as good as Christian McCaffrey is. And so now that he's really kind of turned the page on his training and what he needs to do to get better, you can see it on the field, and what a reward for him. I think it's such a great thing. And his mom and his son and his the mother of his child was there at the game, and like just seeing their joy at the beginning of the game and then how the result happened and how he had just a career high day was so fun to see.
You obviously always want your all pro running back out on the field, Christian McCaffrey, because he is the reigning NFL Offensive Player of the Year. But to know that this team will not skip a beat with Jordan Mason plugged in and will have just as much production, what type of confidence can the 49ers take from that?
Oh, I think a lot, but I think they were confident before. I mean, they've seen what Jordan Mason can do during practice, and with Trent Williams back out there as run blocking, and then also the confidence they have in Dominic Pooney as a rookie on the right side of the offensive line. I think you can see how they are not. I don't think they're not planning to when they're game planning. They're not making concessions for them not being able to do what they normally do. I mean, the expectations are high for everybody on the field, and that goes from guys like Trent Williams, who are, a 16-year vet, to a rookie like Dominic Pooney. The expectations are high. They want to get to the postseason, and I think that you can see their confidence on the field.
One other person to highlight, because there were so many contributors in this game, Jake Moody, who had 6 field goals made. And actually, because of his amazing performance in week one, it was just announced he was named NFC Special Teams Player of the Week for week one. He hit field goals from 46, 51, 31, 53, 23, and 42 yards out. To have that type of performance so early on in the season, how does it just set the tone for what's to come in the next 17 weeks?
I mean, obviously, the offense wants to get into the end zone more often than they did, but the fact that Jake Moody is there to give them points if they can't do it, I think there's a lot of extra confidence there as well. I mean, there was a little bit of doubt when he came in his rookie year and had a few misses early, but 6 in a row, I mean, I think that's pretty spectacular, and he's the first guy to do it since Robbie Gould in 2017, one of 4 players to do it, and the only one of those 4 to hit 2 from 50 yards or longer. So, I mean, great night for Jake Moody. Really happy for him too.
On the other side of the ball, the defense, 2 takeaways and a lot of new faces. What stood out to you from that side of the ball?
Really stood out was Malik Collins and Leonard Floyd because those are new guys to the system. And last year, the defensive linemen that they brought in midseason didn't have, really productive years. I mean, Randy Gregory and Chase Young were brought in, and it was kind of thought that they were going to really turn the defensive line performance around. And they didn't have a full training camp. Nick Bosa said it's hard to get up to speed with this defensive line scheme, what they have to do. And I think Leonard Floyd and Malik Collins are going to be really productive. They've been looking for years for somebody to be a bookend for Nick Bosa, and I think they really found a guy in Leonard Floyd. He already got to Aaron Rodgers, and kind of funny coincidence that he was the last guy to sack Aaron Rodgers and then the first guy to sack Aaron Rodgers in his return. But just the speed of his get off is really impressive. And I think Nick Bosa is excited for what's to come for this defensive line. And I think they're only going to get better.
All right. We also spoke to head coach Kyle Shanahan via conference call to recap the game a little bit further yesterday. And there's a number of updates to some injured players. Christian McCaffrey dealing with some Achilles tendonitis, Aaron Banks day to day, Jawan Jennings day to day with an ankle. There's a chance that linebacker D Winters and Yetur Gross Matos, who's dealing with a knee injury, return to practice this week, and still awaiting updates on Talanoa Hufanga, who's still coming back from that ACL injury. Who do you think we'll see in practice this week?
I would hope to see Talanoa Hufanga. I mean, it sounds like he is really getting close to being completely involved in the defense. And, what a road back. He was ascending. He had a great second year and it was just cut short. So, I think the energy that he brings, it's not just what he does on the field, but what he does off the field as well, the energy he brings. And just watching him when the team huddles up at the beginning of practice, every single handshake for every player is completely different. I don't know how he remembers them all, but just the connection he has with players on both sides of the ball. I think, emotionally he brings the team just a little extra juice, and so it's not just what he does on the field, which is also a huge contributor. He's a huge contributor, but I think that just getting those guys back into the fold helps the team emotionally.
Looking ahead now to Minnesota, like we mentioned at the top of the episode, quick turnaround. You touched on the offensive side of the ball, but generally, what does this team need to tighten up heading into week two?
I mean, I think they were really good against the run. I mean, only 68 yards were allowed, and the Jets have a good run game. So I think it's going to be getting more pressure on Sam Darnold, their old friend, who was the backup to Brock Purdy last year. He started out with a great game in week one. So they really need to get more pressure, still stop the run. But I think, with that kind of getting more in rhythm with each other. And I mean, Fred Warner was the top graded PFF player on the defense. I think he is the key to the defense playing well. But I mean, I think as everything goes along, as they get through a couple weeks of the season, that's when you really get to see what the team is. I mean, I always think that you don't get to see who teams really are till about week 3 or 4 because they practice, they have preseason scrimmages, but it's not the same. And it's not the same combination, especially for the 49ers who had players holding out or players coming back from injury. So, getting the guys that they are going to have for the rest of the season kind of in sync with each other, I think will make you will see the growth. And I think it's going to make them be better and you'll see higher production going through the season.
There was a ton of familiarity with the opponent in week one, from head coach Robert Saleh on the Jets side to Javon Kinlaw. We're also going to see some close connections, like you mentioned, Sam Darnold now starting for Minnesota in week two. What type of unique challenges does that present to the game planning aspect of this?
I think Kyle Shanahan is so good at game planning that it doesn't really phase him at all. But I think what for the younger players going to Minnesota, it is a really loud stadium. That crowd gets into it. The chance that they do, it's their first kind of hostile environment that they're going to see. The veterans are used to it, but I think anytime players go to an away stadium that's really loud like that for the first time, it does kind of like make you think a little bit, okay, this is kind of your welcome to the NFL moment. But you've got rookies that are so mature, and I think it's that they've played longer in college. They had the COVID year. I mean, Dominic Pooney seems so mature for a rookie. I know they're a little bit older. They also, I think with the NFI, it's not like this is the first money that they've ever made either. I think it's, the adjustment to the NFL is a little bit smoother with guys that have played 5, 6 years in college and already made a little bit of money. So I think the jump is a little bit less, but I think it still is going to be kind of one of those eye-opening moments to go to a huge, loud stadium for their second week.
I can absolutely attest to that. US Bank Stadium even has like the open air press box. It gets very loud. You have the skull chant. They kind of got everything going in Minnesota in terms of game presentation and enthusiasm from the fans. So certainly a challenge to look ahead to in week 2. Thank you, Jennifer, so much for joining me this morning. And Faithful, that's going to do it for today. Subscribe to First and 10, presented by Cisco, for more 49ers updates and turn on notifications for any breaking news, Move the Chains episodes. Thanks for tuning in.